In the heart of Manhattan, nestled between towering skyscrapers and glimmering glass, sat Michael Westbrook, tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in an expensive custom suit. His appearance, smooth as polished marble, matched the empire he had meticulously built. Westbrook Enterprises, his logistics company, had become a symbol of success in the city. Investors, celebrities, and politicians sought his advice. He was the untouchable, the man everyone believed had conquered it all. Yet, for all his success, Michael couldn't escape the weight of his own pride. As he strode into his penthouse apartment on the 32nd floor, he carried with him the scent of victory. The night had been filled with champagne and congratulations and an exclusive corporate gala, where he'd been praised endlessly for the company's latest merger. Rachel, his younger, ambitious colleague, whom everyone assumed had been his newest power play, had been right by his side, her blonde hair falling perfectly over her shoulder. The glint in her eyes spoke of shared understanding, one that Michael had mistaken for something more. But as the elevator doors closed behind him, the high of the evening was beginning to wear off. The reality of his home felt different. It was supposed to be his sanctuary, the place where he left the business behind. But lately, he'd felt something else, something creeping beneath the surface of the comfortable routine. At the far end of the living room, Emily, his wife of 12 years, stood near the fireplace, her soft features illuminated by the glow of the fire. Her presence was serene, almost ghostly. She was always calm, always patient, always waiting in the shadows while Michael reveled in the spotlight. "How was the evening?" she asked quietly, her voice soft but sharp, like the calm before a storm. Michael smiled, running a hand through his hair. "Perfect. The merger is solid. Rachel really pulled through. I couldn't have asked for a better partner." He didn't notice the shift in Emily's expression, nor the subtle tightening of her jaw. He didn't see her stand a little straighter, or the way her eyes locked onto him with intensity that was too sharp to be mere politeness. Emily had always been quiet, reserved. Michael had long convinced himself that she didn't care much for business, that her world was centered on their children and the comfortable routine they had built together. But in the back of his mind, something had always whispered that he was wrong. Tonight, that whisper grew louder. "Michael, I need to talk to you," Emily said, her voice barely rising above the ambient sounds of the apartment. She didn't move closer, didn't make a dramatic gesture. She simply stood there, waiting. Michael, still distracted by the echo of accolades and champagne toasts, felt a flicker of annoyance. "Not now, Em. I'm tired. I need to unwind before the next board meeting." But Emily didn't let it go. She didn't budge, didn't soften her stance. "This can't wait." Rachel had been charming, confident, and everything Michael had wanted her to be in public. But in private, Emily's steady gaze cut deeper than any compliment Rachel could give him. Something was changing in her. He couldn't name it. He had been too consumed by his own success, too blinded by his own pride. He hadn't seen it coming. And that's when it happened. The doorbell rang. Mara, Michael's latest mistress, who he had invited to gala that evening, as if to rub in Emily's face the idea that their marriage was nothing more than a forgotten chapter in his well-scripted life, stepped inside with a flirtatious smile. Emily didn't flinch. In fact, the moment Michael saw her, he froze, his smile slipping ever so slightly. He'd never seen Emily so still, so composed, almost detached. Mara was dressed in a striking red dress, clearly chosen to stand out. Her blonde hair cascaded down her back in waves, framing her sharp features like a predatory lioness. Her presence filled the room the way light fills an empty space, bold, unapologetic, and overpowering. "Michael," she purred, brushing past Emily with the kind of familiarity that spoke volumes. "I thought you might want to unwind after the gala. I've got a bottle of champagne waiting for us." But Emily didn't acknowledge Mara, didn't react to her presence. Instead, she stayed rooted in place, her eyes flicking to Michael with a quiet yet firm intensity. The silence between them stretched long, too long for Michael to ignore. And that was when it hit him. He had made a mistake. He had been playing a dangerous game, and he wasn't in control of the board anymore. It wasn't just his company that was slipping away. It was his life. Mara, seeing the tension in the room, decided to play her part. With a cat-like grace, she moved toward Emily, her voice dripping with condescension. "So, you must be the perfect wife," she said, her tone light but biting, like a needle wrapped in silk. "You must be so proud of him. But, Michael really does all the hard work. I'm sure you don't mind." The room seemed to freeze. Michael opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He couldn't move, couldn't react. His life was spiraling, and he could no longer pretend it was all under control. Without warning, Mara raised her hand and slapped Emily across the face. It was a clean, controlled slap, one that echoed through the room like a slap to the fabric of his reality. In front of the kids. In front of everyone. Michael's stomach twisted in knots. His silence, his inaction, he realized too late that they weren't just humiliating Emily. They were humiliating him, exposing his weakness to the world. But Emily, in that moment, remained still. Her hand pressed gently against her reddened cheek. There was no outburst, no tears. She simply turned to Michael, her eyes holding a calm fury that he could no longer ignore. The kids screamed in shock. One of them dropped a toy, while another clung to their mother's leg. Trembling, "Michael," Emily whispered, "this is where your arrogance will take us. This is your empire, built on betrayal and ego. You let her slap me in front of our children. You let her take my place, take my power, and you watched." But Michael's thoughts were fractured, his control slipping further away. What did he think would happen? What did he expect when he allowed his affairs to spiral out of control? When he allowed Mara to think she had any place in his life other than as a fleeting distraction? Emily turned toward the kids, her voice soft but commanding. "Go upstairs. Go to your rooms." The children clung to her as if they had learned in an instant that the ground beneath their feet had shifted. Their world would never be the same. As Emily led them upstairs, Michael stood frozen in the living room, Mara's presence lingering like a shadow in the corner of his mind. He thought about his company, his success, his reputation, all of it, now hanging by a thread. He had been the king, but he had failed to see the quiet queen who had always stood at his side. He had failed to see her power. And as the door softly closed behind Emily and the kids, Michael felt something else close behind it. His empire, his marriage, his life, all slipping away. Michael sat alone in the living room, the weight of the silence pressing down on him like a suffocating fog. His mind replayed the events of the evening, each scene unfolding with painful clarity. His fingers, still tingling from the shock of the slap, gripped the armrest of his chair, but he couldn't seem to find the strength to stand. His empire, his family, his whole life, everything was beginning to unravel. Mara had left without a word, her presence as fleeting as a lie he had built around his life. He had seen her so many times, both in public and behind closed doors, and yet he never realized how fragile his control had been. In his pursuit of power, he had allowed it all to slip through his fingers, unaware that the person closest to him, his wife, the one who had silently shared the weight of their world, was the one who truly held the keys. He could still hear the slap echoing in his mind. It wasn't the sting of his cheek that hurt. It was the sting of betrayal, the realization that he had allowed someone, anyone, to humiliate her like that. But the worst part wasn't the slap itself. It was the silence that followed. The cold, unwavering silence from Emily. He had expected her to explode in anger, to cry, to demand something, anything. But she didn't. She just stood there, calmly accepting the abuse in a way that made him feel like the fool he was. She had never been the type to react impulsively. She had always been calm, collected, almost unnervingly so. But that calm, that quiet fury, was worse than any shouting or accusation. Rachel, his colleague and supposed confidant, had been silent as well. She had watched, perhaps with a slight smirk on her face, but she hadn't said a word either. She had known better than to speak. There was no point in defending the indefensible. Michael's mind raced as he tried to piece together the last few weeks, the business deals, the late nights, the trips with Rachel, and how they had all led to this moment. He had grown complacent, assuming that his success in the boardroom could shield him from the consequences of his personal life. But tonight, in the face of Emily's quiet strength, he had been exposed. His power wasn't what he thought it was. It wasn't in the contract he signed or the mergers he brokered. It was in the home he had neglected, the marriage he had taken for granted. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Michael glanced up, startled by the sound, before his heart sank. He knew who it was. Emily. For a brief moment, he considered ignoring it, pretending he hadn't heard, but something inside him urged him to face the music. He stood slowly, his legs weak beneath him, and crossed the room. As he opened the door, he saw her standing there, her eyes calm, but there was something else in them, something he couldn't read. She was dressed in a soft robe, her hair slightly disheveled as if she had been awake for a while. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice steady but distant. Michael nodded, stepping aside to let her in. His throat tightened as she walked past him, her presence as powerful and quiet as ever. Emily sat down on the couch, smoothing her robe before folding her hands in her lap. Michael remained standing, unsure what to say, how to approach this moment. She didn't look at him right away. Instead, her gaze was fixed on the window, the faint glow of the city lights reflecting off the glass. She looked like she was gathering her thoughts, preparing herself for something she had long known was coming. Finally, she spoke. "You've been living in a fantasy, Michael." His stomach twisted at the words. He had been expecting anger, maybe even condemnation. But there was no fury in her tone, just a quiet certainty. She wasn't looking for a fight. She was done fighting. "Everything you've done," she continued, "all the business deals, all the praise, all the success, it's meaningless. Because it doesn't matter who you become in the eyes of the world. It doesn't matter how much you achieve, how much you conquer. You can't even protect your own family from the destruction you've caused." Michael opened his mouth to protest, but she held up her hand, silencing him. "I never asked for this life, Michael," she said softly. "I didn't ask for the late nights, the lies, the betrayal. You kept telling me you loved me, but you couldn't even see what you were doing to me. You couldn't see the woman you married was slowly dying inside, watching you destroy everything we built for the sake of, what, an image? An empire?" The words hit him like a punch to the gut, each one carrying more weight than the last. He had always been so sure of himself, so certain that the world operated on principles he understood. Work hard, take control, win. But now, standing before Emily, he realized how little he truly understood about what mattered. What had he won? Really? What was the cost? "I know what you're doing, Michael," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper now. "You think you can fix this. You think you can make up for everything with an apology or a grand gesture. But you can't. This is bigger than you, bigger than us. And you need to realize something. The woman you slapped tonight, the woman you humiliated in front of your children, in front of your mistress, she's not the same woman you married." Michael's heart began to race. He was starting to understand. He had thought Emily was weak. He had thought she was the one who needed him. But now, in the quiet moments of her strength, he realized he had underestimated her for far too long. She had been patient, yes, but she had also been calculating. And now she was done. "I've already filed for divorce," she said, her words coming as a shock. Michael staggered back, the realization hitting him like a freight train. "But I thought we could work through this," he stammered, the panic rising in his chest. "We've been through worse. Emily, we can fix this." Emily's eyes locked onto his. "You never saw me, Michael. You never saw who I really was. And now, you're going to see what happens when you ignore the person who was always in control. You're going to see what happens when you try to destroy a woman who has nothing left to lose." Michael's world had always been one of precision and control. Each deal he closed, each decision he made, had been calculated with the precision of a chess master. He had built his empire from the ground up, piece by piece, sacrificing everything, including his family, for success. But now, standing in the wreckage of his marriage, he realized that all his calculations had been wrong. The following day, Michael's mind was a whirlwind. Emily's words from the night before kept replaying in his head like a broken record, each phrase digging deeper into his soul. "The woman you slapped tonight, the woman you humiliated in front of your children, in front of your mistress, she's not the same woman you married." What did she mean by that? She's not the same woman. As the morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of his penthouse, Michael stared out over the city. The towering buildings below seemed to mock him, reminding him of the empire he had built. But now, everything felt like a house of cards, ready to fall with the slightest touch. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily, about how, in that moment of humiliation, she had stayed calm, silent, detached, almost as if she had known this day was coming all along. The realization stung. Emily had been a quiet observer in his life, the one who had silently watched as he lived in his bubble of success and arrogance. But now that bubble had burst, and in the aftermath, Michael was left with nothing but the consequences of his actions. He heard the sound of footsteps behind him and turned to see Rachel entering the room. Her eyes were bright, her expression unreadable, as if she too could feel the shift in the air. "Michael," she said softly, her voice full of something that bordered on sympathy, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk." Michael's gut twisted at the sight of her. This was the woman he'd allowed to become a part of his life, the one he had mistaken for a partner, a confidant. She had been his escape from reality, his way of distracting himself from the cracks forming in his marriage. But now, in the light of what had happened, she seemed like just another piece of the puzzle that had led him to this moment. "What is it, Rachel?" Michael asked, his voice tight. He couldn't hide the frustration in his tone, nor the exhaustion in his body. He had no energy left to maintain the facade. Rachel crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "We both know what happened last night. You think this is just going to blow over? You think you can smooth things over with Emily like you always do?" Michael flinched at her words. "You don't understand," he began, his voice faltering. "I can fix this. I'll fix it. I'll do whatever it takes. Emily just needs time." Rachel's lips curved into a small, cynical smile. "Time? She's already made her decision, Michael. It's over." She filed for divorce. The words hit him like a slap, a jarring reminder that everything he had taken for granted was slipping through his fingers. The suddenness of it, the realization that Emily was no longer the woman who would stand by him no matter how much he screwed up, suffocated him. "But we can fix this," he insisted, his voice rising now, desperation creeping in. "I'll get her back. I'll do whatever it takes." Rachel stepped closer to him, her gaze cold and calculating. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her tone laced with bitterness. "You never saw her, Michael. You never saw how strong she really was. She's been playing this game, too, and now she's out of it. She's done. And you're a man who's about to lose everything. All because you let your ego control you. Michael recoiled, as if struck by the force of her words. "You're wrong," he muttered, but even as he said it, he felt the weight of her truth. Emily was stronger than he had ever given her credit for, and now he was going to pay the price for underestimating her. The room fell silent for a moment, the tension thick and suffocating. Rachel seemed to sense his growing realization, and for the first time, she looked almost pitying. "Don't bother trying to fix it, Michael. It's too late." And then she left. The next few days passed in a blur. Michael spent hours in his office, staring at financial reports and company strategies, trying desperately to keep his mind occupied. But no matter how hard he tried, his thoughts kept drifting back to Emily and the children. He couldn't shake the image of her calm, unwavering gaze as she had left him behind. It was late afternoon when the call came. Mr. Westbrook, a voice on the other end said, "We have the documents for the divorce settlement. Emily's lawyer is ready to meet with you." The words hit him like a punch in the gut. Divorce. The word echoed in his mind, the finality of it reverberating in his chest. His fingers trembled as he placed the receiver down. His world had just shifted. He was no longer in control. Emily had taken the first step towards a life he never thought she'd have without him. And now, Michael had to face the consequences of his actions. He could feel his empire slipping further away, the weight of his mistakes crushing him. His marriage, his family, his future, all was being ripped apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The truth, finally, was clear. The power he had thought he held over his family, over his marriage, was an illusion. Emily had always been the one in control. She had just allowed him to believe he was the one pulling the strings. And now, it was her turn to pull them all back. The next few days were a blur of endless meetings, legal threats, and the slow, agonizing process of his life, crumbling under the weight of his own decisions. Michael's office had become a prison, a cold, sterile room filled with stacks of paperwork and reports that seemed to mock him with their impersonal complexity. The empire he had spent years building fell hollow now. The trophies, the accolades, the carefully cultivated image. It was all meaningless in the face of the truth that had become undeniable. Emily was done. The children, too young to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation, had started to withdraw into their own world. He hadn't seen them since that night. They stayed in their rooms, avoiding their father's gaze, as if they could sense the storm that had hit their once happy home. Every conversation with his legal team felt like an execution of the life he had known. Divorce papers, custody arrangements, financial settlements. It all seemed like an irreversible descent into chaos. And each step down felt like another nail in the coffin of his identity. Michael leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. His thoughts were fractured. He couldn't focus on anything for more than a few seconds. Everything felt surreal, like he was watching someone else's life unfold. The questions kept coming, relentless and sharp. How had Emily kept this all hidden from him? How had she seen through the veil of his arrogance when no one else had? And most pressing of all, how had she known when to walk away? In his mind, he replayed the moments, the little things he'd ignored for years. The late-night calls that seemed innocent at the time. The business meetings that were supposed to be private, but always ended up being interrupted by Emily's quiet authority. The subtle ways she'd always navigate around him, allowing him to think he was the one in control. It all seemed so obvious now, so painfully clear. But it was too late. There was a knock on his office door, and Michael's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected anyone. His secretary didn't usually interrupt his isolated days. But this time, there was no escaping the inevitable. The door opened, and there she stood, Rachel. She had been the one who had taken up space in his life, the one who had been his emotional escape, the one he had trusted to help him forget the cracks in his marriage. Now, She was just another reminder of how misplaced his decisions had been. Her eyes were cold, her face unreadable. But there was a tension in the air between them, a space that neither of them seemed willing to cross. "What are you doing here?" Michael asked, his voice strained. He knew what she was going to say before the words even left her mouth, but a part of him still needed to hear it. Rachel didn't answer immediately. She took a step into the room, standing just inside the door, as if she weren't sure whether to cross the threshold completely. She paused, looking at Michael with a mixture of pity and contempt, as if she too was realizing how much of a fool he had become. "I'm here to tell you something," she said softly, her voice steady. "Something you need to understand." Michael stared at her, his chest tight. "What's that?" "I don't know how to say this, Michael," Rachel continued, "but I think you need to hear it. The things you've done, the choices you made, they're not just going to disappear. You think you can fix this, but you can't. Emily's gone. She's not coming back." Michael's throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. The words felt like they were lodged in his chest, suffocating him. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Rachel stepped forward, her gaze sharp, piercing through him. "You think I'm here to console you, don't you? You think I'm going to tell you everything's going to be okay, that I'm going to fix this. But I'm not. Then why are you here?" Michael finally managed to ask, his voice a broken whisper. Rachel's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Because I've realized something. You're not the only one who's been playing a game. Emily's been playing it too, and she's won." Michael's chest constricted. He tried to laugh, but it was hollow, desperate. "What are you talking about?" Rachel walked towards him slowly, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "You never saw her, Michael. Not really. You never saw how strong she was, how smart she was. While you were playing the corporate world, she was quietly making moves of her own. She knew exactly how to handle you, how to handle all of this." Michael's heart raced as he processed her words. Emily had known. She had seen through him. All along, she had been the one in control, playing a game that Michael hadn't even known he was a part of. "Emily was always one step ahead of you," Rachel continued. "She wasn't just your wife. She was your business partner, your silent partner. And now she's taking everything. The company, the house, everything. And there's nothing you can do to stop it." The realization hit him like a tidal wave. His breath caught in his throat, and he found himself gripping the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white. The woman he had taken for granted, the woman he had humiliated. She was not only walking away from him, but she was also taking control of everything that mattered to him. "You've lost," Rachel said, her voice cold now. "And there's nothing left for you to do but watch as she takes it all." Michael stood frozen, his mind spinning. He had thought he could control everything, but in the end, it was Emily who controlled him. The business, the money, the image, none of it mattered now. He had no idea how deep her plan went, how well she had hidden her power beneath the surface. And now it was too late. She was taking everything. Rachel turned and walked toward the door, but just before leaving, she stopped. "Oh, and Michael," she said without turning around, "the only thing left for you is to figure out how you're going to explain this to the kids. You've already lost Emily. Don't lose them, too." With that, she was gone, leaving Michael standing alone in the empty, sterile office that had once been the symbol of his success. The silence in the room felt suffocating. He was alone, and for the first time in his life, Michael realized that he wasn't in control anymore. Emily had taken the power, and now the storm was coming. Michael barely slept that night. The silence of his penthouse felt like an oppressive weight, pressing in from all sides. It wasn't just the weight of Emily's absence or the sting of Rachel's words. It was a realization that everything he had worked for, everything he thought he'd built, was slipping through his fingers. The next morning, the air in the office was thick with tension. His usually bustling staff seemed to avoid him, their hushed conversations and averted gazes telling him everything he needed to know. They were waiting for him to make a move, to somehow fix the disaster he had made of his life. But Michael didn't have any answers. The truth was, he didn't know what to do next. He sat at his desk, staring at the papers in front of him, the merger proposals, the financial reports, the legal notices. Everything was a blur. Nothing seemed to matter anymore. Emily's absence felt like an echo in the room, as if she had been a heartbeat that kept everything alive. Without her, everything felt hollow. The door to his office creaked open, and Michael looked up to see his assistant, Jessica, standing in the doorway, hesitant. "Mr. Westbrook," she began, her voice soft but clear. "There's someone here to see you." He blinked, surprised. "Who?" "A man from your legal team," she replied, stepping aside to let the figure in. Michael's stomach tightened. His legal team. He had been avoiding them, hoping to buy more time. But time had run out. The man who entered was Davis Monroe, a high-powered attorney who had been working with Michael for years. His presence in the office now felt like a stark reminder of everything Michael was about to lose. "Mr. Westbrook," Davis said, his tone cool but respectful. "We need to talk." Michael stood and gestured for him to sit. As Davis sat down across from him, Michael felt a pang of frustration. What was left to discuss? The papers had already been filed. The settlement, the division of assets. It was all happening, and there was no way to stop it. But he had to face it. He had to confront the consequences of his actions, no matter how painful. "I know what you're going to say," Michael said, rubbing his eyes. "I've already received the divorce papers. I've seen the financial breakdown. It's over, isn't it?" Davis gave him a measured look. "It's not over, Michael, but it will be if you don't act quickly." Michael furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "Emily's lawyer is pushing for full custody of the children. If you don't make a move, she's going to get everything. Your company, your assets, the house, and the kids, too." Michael's heart skipped a beat. The thought of losing his children, losing them, it was too much to bear. "I can't let that happen," he said, his voice suddenly firm. "What I need to do," Davis looked at him intently, "you need to show Emily that you're serious about fixing things. Not just with the business, but with her. You've ignored her for too long, Michael. You need to prove to her that you understand the gravity of the situation." Michael stood up from his desk, pacing. "She's already made her decision. She doesn't want me anymore." Davis remained calm, his gaze never leaving Michael. "That's what you think, but you still have a chance. Emily wants respect, Michael. She wants acknowledgement for the work she's done. And she's not going to get that from you until you stop pretending you're in control. You need to show her that you recognize her strength, her power." Michael felt a surge of anger, the familiar frustration bubbling up again. "I've done everything for her, for us. She's just leaving me, and I can't." "No," Davis interrupted, his voice steady. "You haven't. You've never seen her, Michael. You've been too busy chasing power, chasing status. You never saw the woman who helped you build this company, who kept your life together behind the scenes. She was always the one who supported you, and now you're losing her." Michael stopped in his tracks, the words sinking in. Davis was right. He had taken Emily for granted for so long, assuming she would always be there. But now that she was gone with his children and the very company he had spent years building, he was left with nothing but the wreckage of his own mistakes. "I'll do what it takes," Michael said finally, his voice low but resolute. "I'll fight for her, for the kids, for everything." Davis nodded. "Good. Then let's start by making the first move." The first move, Michael realized, wasn't going to be about winning Emily back in a way he had imagined. It wasn't going to be about grand gestures or empty promises. It wasn't about getting the company back. Either. No. It was about proving himself, about showing her that he had finally understood what had been blind to for so long. The power of the woman he had married, the woman who had stood silently beside him, and now stood ready to take everything away. He couldn't wait any longer. He needed to make a statement. Emily's power was undeniable, and Michael was about to learn what it felt like to truly be at her mercy. As the day wore on, Michael called his executive team for a meeting, determined to make an impact. He didn't want to waste any more time pretending that things could go back to normal. He had a new reality to face, one that included understanding the value of what he had always taken for granted. He was no longer the untouchable CEO. He wasn't even sure who he was anymore. But as he prepared for the next phase of his life, he realized one thing above all else. His actions had led him here, and now he had no choice but to confront the consequences. Michael Westbrook stood in the center of his office. The sprawling view of New York City spread out before him. It was a city that had once represented his triumph, a testament to his ambition, to the empire he had built. But now it felt like a cold, indifferent landscape, a place where he had failed. The towering skyscrapers, the luxurious cars speeding to the streets below, it was all still there. But for Michael, everything felt distant, almost surreal. He was no longer the powerful figure who commanded boardrooms and dictated deals. He was just a man, alone in a city that had once been his kingdom. The phone rang, cutting through his thoughts. He picked it up, his hand shaking slightly. Mr. Westbrook. His lawyer's voice came through the receiver. We received an update. Emily has requested a meeting to discuss the terms of the divorce and the custody arrangement. The word stung. Michael had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, it felt like a final blow. His heart pounded as he fought to steady his breathing. Tomorrow morning, you need to be prepared. This is not going to be easy. Michael closed his eyes, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. He had thought he could control everything, his business, his image, his life. But now, it was all slipping through his fingers. He had built this empire, but he had never truly built his family. Emily had been there, quietly holding everything together, making sacrifices while he chased success. Now, she was walking away, and Michael had no one to blame but himself. The next morning, Michael walked into the conference room where Emily sat waiting. The room was dimly lit, and the air felt thick with tension. He had expected anger, maybe even resentment, but instead, Emily looked calm, almost serene. Her posture was straight, her face composed, as if she had long ago come to terms with what was happening. She didn't look up as he entered, her gaze fixed on the papers in front of her. She had always been like this, silent, calculating, a woman who never needed to say much to be understood. Michael had always admired that about her, even if he hadn't fully appreciated it until now. "Sit down, Michael," Emily said softly, her voice steady. "We need to get this over with." He took a seat across from her, his mind racing. He wanted to speak, wanted to explain himself, but the words felt inadequate. What could he say? How could he explain the mess he had made of their lives? There was no excuse, no justification. "I know why you're here," Emily continued, her voice unwavering. "You think this can be fixed. You think that if you just apologize, if you make a grand gesture, I'll come back to you. But that's not how this works anymore, Michael. You lost your chance." Michael swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to speak. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm asking you, please, just give me a chance to fix this. I've realized what I've lost, what I took for granted. I can't change the past, but I want to make things right." Emily looked up at him then, her eyes steady and piercing. "It's too late for that." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Too late. He had been living in a fantasy, thinking that his business and wealth could fix everything. But in the end, it wasn't about the business. It wasn't about the money. It was about respect. It was about trust. And he had failed her on both fronts. "I've been patient with you, Michael," Emily said, her tone shifting slightly. "For years, I've been standing by, watching you chase your own ego, watching you destroy everything we built together. And I've kept quiet because I thought you'd realize it on your own. But you never did. And now I'm done." Michael's chest tightened. He could feel the weight of the decision in the room, like a wall between them. She was done. There was no turning back now. "I don't want to fight anymore," Emily continued, her voice softer now. "I want peace. For me, for the kids, for all of us. You think you can fix this, but the truth is, Michael, you can't. Not anymore." There was a pause, and for a brief moment, Michael thought he could hear the sound of his own heart breaking. The finality of her words settled deep within him. It was over. The life he had known was gone. But Emily wasn't done. "The company is mine, Michael," she said quietly, her words carrying the weight of a decision that Michael had never seen coming. "I've owned it for years. I've been running it from the shadows, while you've been out there playing the part of CEO. All these deals, all the mergers, it was all me. I just let you think it was yours, because I thought you'd come around. I thought you'd see the bigger picture." Michael's mind raced, his thoughts spinning as the weight of her revelation crashed over him. She had been the one pulling the strings all along. She had been the silent partner, the one who had always been in control. And now she was taking it all back. "You've never truly seen me, Michael," she continued, her voice steady but filled with an undeniable power. "You've never seen what I've done, what I'm capable of. And now you will." Michael felt his breath catch in his throat as the realization sank in. The company, the house, the children, it was all slipping away, piece by piece. Emily wasn't just walking away from their marriage. She was taking everything he had built. "I'm filing for full custody," Emily said, her words cutting through the silence. "And I'll make sure you never forget the consequences of what you've done." Michael's world collapsed around him. He had lost it all. And now, there was nothing left to do but watch as Emily took control of everything he had once thought was his.